At the meeting by welcoming everyone to the room. The agenda packs are published on mod.gov, and there's a link to the website. There's a link from our website. When you speak, if you could speak clearly, state your name for the benefit of anyone listening online. It's a hybrid meeting for those of you that are aware. So obviously there are the members in the room are the ones that are able to make any decisions, the members of the committee that make the decisions, members and also officers will join us virtually if necessary. We are quorate today, which is a good start to that. In respect of housekeeping, there are no expected fire alarms, but should this happen, please follow Democratic Services officers and muster as necessary. For those that are new to the building, the toilets are just outside. I think that's everything covered for that. I'm not getting any hands waving online, so I can assume everyone can hear me, which is fine. Thank you for that. So agenda item 1 is apologies for absence, please. Jamie.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee.
Someone online, someone in the room joined us with their.
So I'll say that again. Thank you, Chair. Good morning, committee. We have received apologies from Councillor Snell. We have also received apologies from one of our co-opted members, Ruth Hobbs. And we have 2 of the committee online, Chair, which is Councillor Hunt and Councillor Hadley. Thank you.
Thank you. Special mention to Councillor Hadley, who's not been well, so I wish you a swift recovery, sir, but thank you for joining us online. Are there any other apologies that I'm not aware of? Okay, so agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. Members of the committee are asked to make any declarations relevant to the agenda items today that aren't published on the council's website and their normal declarations. Evie.
Sorry, I better declare I'm yet to update my forms that I'm now working for a member of parliament.
Thank you for that. Okay, item 3 of our agenda is minutes for the last meeting. They've been circulated. Are we happy that I sign those as a true record? Any points or relevant issues that I need to bring up? No? Okay, that's fine. Item 4 of our agenda is public question time. I'm not aware of any. No members online. Okay, item 5 then. We talk about our future work programme. Obviously, the agenda, the papers are published there. Are there any points or issues in relation to the next meeting? Obviously, we are on the 7th of August meeting, which we have. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We have today the information on the joint scrutiny with the Regional Adoption Agency. I wonder if there is something here for this committee to look at. We are only allowed to look in terms of our own children rather than the whole area. But I wonder whether we ought to scrutinise the funding that we provide and whether we are entirely satisfied with our representation and other bodies, the controlling bodies. As I understand it, there's a view that there should be no member representation at strategic level anymore, and this feels to me something that would be worrying for Somerset. Okay,
thank you. So for those of you new to the room, so what we're looking at the moment, our agenda, you'll see at the end of the agenda that there are items for information. Because of the amount of information this committee has passed across it for its information between meetings, we sometimes circulate documents for reference, and what we then do is allow at the end of the meeting members to make any comments or points in relation to the documents circulated. One of those documents circulated was a report from the Regional Adoption Agency and the Joint Scrutiny Committee that they held. There were some interesting points that come from that. So I think that what I'll do, Francis, if you want to drop me a line with your specific interest, the points to cover, and then what we'll do, we'll have that conversation as chair and vice chair, and we'll try to figure out. I think it needs to come to this committee with a review to the terms of reference so that we can understand it and see if we can influence that. So I know that Fiona would have made a note of that. So if you drop me an email, then we can make sure that the points are relevant and covered for that. Thank you. Just for reference, obviously today, one of the areas that we've got is the joint targeted area inspection. we've treating that, we've got people coming to speak to us, which is going to be, we're treating that as a first element. The next meeting, we've got the action plan coming back out of that, so that we can, so some of the, hypothetically, I expect some of the members will be asking what's going on in relation to it and what are we doing about it. So some of those points will be covered in the action plan that will come next time. So it's more a matter of letting you all know that we recognise there will be something, an outcome to it, and we've already sort of addressed that as we go. Any other points or issues in relation to our forward work programme? Okay, just one point for me on our forward work programme. It's in relation to, I know I've asked it before, but I think I need to formalise it a little bit. Both the Vice Chair and I need to trying to figure out, there's so many things happening around children's services at the moment. One of the things I think we need to formalise is trying to identify what we should be looking at, what we might be looking at, what we could be looking at it. There are some reports that I'm not sure of where it sits on the bit. So what I'll ask is that Fiona makes a note that perhaps we'll have a conversation at the next meeting or the meeting after, just detailing what reports are out there, what issues we should be looking at, and we're just making sure, having a little review, that we're getting to us the things that we should be getting. Because so that the last thing I would ever want, I always look at these things with an Ofsted eye, as in, I don't want someone to look at me and say you should have looked at that without us having the ability to review that. So one of the things we can do is have a look at what the items that are relevant to this committee, and make sure that we get the information that we should be receiving. And just the next bit, obviously the next meeting is the 18th of September. Okay, moving forward then, item 6 of our agenda is Children's Services budget monitoring. It's month 3. We've got Chris is with us in the room. Would anyone, is it straight in with Chris? No, we just, Chris, over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So Chris Evans, Head of Finance Business Partnering. As the Chair has said, this is the month 3 budget monitoring to the end of June. So Joe is helpfully going to drive the slides. So on a net budget of 142 million for 24-25. So we're currently forecasting 147.4 million. So that's an adverse variance of 5.4 million. This is 300,000 kind of worse off, as it were, from month 2. You can see there the big variance at the top, the children's and families, which is 1.3 million movement from month 2. And then some goodish news, as it were, the ones below, Commissioner Performance and Education and Transport, currently they are better than they were from month 3. So it's a 3.8% adverse variance on the predicted budget. So a bit more detail into the one of the obvious things that we have an issue with is external placements. You can see there the table detailing all the elements of the say the external placements. The big one at the top, the residential placements, currently predicted to be £4.8 million overspent. So that is a £900,000 worse off than we're predicting in month 2. You'll also see unregistered placements, which I'll come into a bit more detail on that shortly. Again, a £1.3 million overspend there. And there's another one I want to point out, which is the residential parent and child figure there of £1.7 million overall variance on the budget. That's mainly around families in residential care. Some of it is around courts and their direction and how long they actually stay within residential, which can be longer than perhaps we expect. Moving slightly on to a bit more breakdown of that again. So you can see some graphs there. So for 24-25 residential placements, we did budget for an average of around 73 placements. We are up towards the end of June. We are looking at around the 100 mark, which is obviously quite considerably higher than what we expected. And then moving on to the right-hand side there, you'll see unregistered placements. We are up to around the 7 figure, which is at the end of June. We budgeted for 1, but we are forecasting around 3 for the rest of the year. So again, higher than we obviously anticipated. And then we've got a children looked after numbers there, just to highlight really the issue that children's services have. You can see a rise there of 52 over the last 12 months of children looked after coming into care. So there is considerable increase there. Moving on to education transport. So that's currently looking at a £600,000 overspend on a budget of 32.6. The big issue, or the biggest variance there, as you can see, is in education. Some of the medium-term financial plan savings are not going to be fully expected to be achieved, and the service hasn't passed on a lot of the high inflation costs onto the services. So it's led to the £1.1 million variance that we're expecting in there. There's some good news. The extended rights to travel grant, we've carried forward some of that grant funding from 23-24. So it is increased to about 1.1 million, as we budgeted for 600,000. So that's obviously some good news there. And then finally moving on to the dedicated schools grant. We were expecting a deficit in 23-24 of 18.9 million. However, we are looking at an increase on top of that of another 4.2 million. So in independent non-maintained schools, that's INMS placements. So in the deficit management plan, we averaged about 415. Actually, the forecast is up around the 449 mark at the moment. And then the mainstream top-up and costed plans, again, it's a £1.4 million additional than we expected, and that's to do with costed plans and the top-ups. So there's a whistle-stop tour of where we are from a budget monitoring perspective. Happy to take any questions.
Christy, while you've got that slide up, could you go back one? Could you explain the acronyms to me, please? INMS?
Independent non-maintained schools is the INMS. We can change those. Deficit management plan, dedicated schools grant is the DSG. What other ones we got? I think that's it. We'll certainly change those on the next slide. Sorry.
No worries. Thank you for that. So while members consider any questions, could you go back up again to the external placements month? That one there. So the areas for overspend. So I understand most. So, but the one that residential parent and child, Claire, perhaps, or someone could.
So residential parent and child is a placement type that we don't use very often. You'll see it. Better, yeah. It's usually ordered by the family court, where a parent with a small child needs an assessment, and for some reason it's deemed that the risks are so high that it's not suitable for that parent and child to be in a fostering placement together. So we don't use it very often, but when we do use them, they're very expensive because the risks are so high. Last year, I think we came in slightly over on residential parent and child, just thinking about it. It's pretty unpredictable because we can't tell who's going to come through with a newborn baby, where that level of risk is going to be. But obviously, sort of, you only get about 5 or 6 months notice of that. So that figure there is accurate currently, but we don't know if that will be accurate towards the end of the year. Make sense?
So it's unexpected, is what you're saying, and but you're aware and you're dealing with it. So I'm reading across to the movement. So, but towards the end of year, it's still showing as an overspend. Is that correct? Is that because of the impact of now?
Due to the number of children and parents we have in residential parent and child currently, they usually only last for 3 months in a court process for assessment, and then the child's either separated or returned to the parents in a less restrictive environment. We do have delays in the family court system because the court system is overwhelmed with cases. So cases, according to the regulations, should last 26 weeks, maximum of 6 months in the court system. The average in Somerset currently is 52 weeks. So if we have to keep a parent and child in a parent and child placement for 52 weeks, the budget will be slaughtered, basically. We won't be able to manage in the amount that we've actually budgeted for.
Thank you. That's very helpful because it is making us aware of where we are in relation to that, and the court is not quite within our. So okay, so I've got obviously John. I'll come to John online in a second, but in the room we've got Marcus. Any other members? Thank you, Marcus.
Thank you, Chair. Every time I look at these budgets, I think I still feel like a newbie on this committee. Obviously, looking at the variance of 5.4, I just always get the feeling when we talk about these budgets that actually we're almost in the lap of the gods sometimes when it comes to this budget. And you'd like to think there's budgets you have control of and you can make adjustments to try and save it. But actually, as I think Claire just said, it could all depend on what goes on elsewhere. So if I was to ask the question, what hope have we got of clawing it back? It'd almost be like, who knows? It's sort of, has anyone got a crystal ball and how can we do it? So then I end up thinking, well, okay, so you can't do anything about that. What about school? What about the transport? Is there anything, long term we can do about that? Because that's maybe something we do have a little bit more control of. And I know it's it's only a £600,000 overspend. But other things that we can look at now that will try and reduce that in the long run when it comes to the education and transport budget.
Thank you for the question, Marcus. You've hit the nail pretty much on the head. This committee over the years have been asked by executive to look at our overspends and how we can impact them. So last year or the last 18 months, the two areas of overspend have been external placements and home to school transport, the main ones. And we've done a task and finish group on both of those. As it happens, later in this meeting, we've got a bit of an update on the home to school transport. So the officer responsible, Phil, when he does that presentation, will answer some of those questions in relation to that. And Heather is waving at me to come in, so I'll bring Heather in and then.
Thank you so much. I just thought I'd respond as well, Marcus, because as the chair says, you've hit the nail on the head in lots of respects. I think, but the key thing for me, I feel like a newbie too, having just come in as a lead member for this area, is that you're right. The demand is something that we have real difficulty managing. Demand is incredibly hard because if a child presents and needs to be taken into our care, they have to be taken into our care. And if a court tells us we have to do it in a certain way, I'm going to be really, I probably shouldn't say this, but those children and family placements, they can be like £11,000 a week and mandated by the court, and you could be in there. So there's lots of things that can happen that we can't anticipate and we have to roll with. But the key thing then is not to go, oh, well, what's it's demand-led service. We can't even try that. You'll get lots of information from my colleagues behind me on the home transport, the transport side, doing all kinds of fabulous things in the face of quite difficult statute that says for children with SEND, we have to provide transport. So some of the statutes and the laws make life hard for us. It doesn't stop us from trying to get better at what we do. So I know they're doing great guns on that. But from our side, on the social care side, we do still have to try. And certainly things like the Homes and Horizons intervention is doing something by having some of our own homes, is doing something to try and disrupt that marketplace where there's a stranglehold from the private companies that run the children's homes that we have. And if you were running a business, you would take probably the thing that suits your business model better and the children who might have fewer needs. And so those children have harder times and harder needs. They're the ones that we end up, having to put them in places we'd rather not put them. So I just wanted to kind of assure you that yes, the demand-led element of it makes it incredibly hard to manage, but doesn't mean to say we shouldn't try to pull every lever that we can to do the best thing. Because often, I think Clay should scoff a bit more when I say this because it seems a bit too simplistic. But if we do the right thing, it's often cheaper. It's often better for the child. You take fostering. Fostering is much better for the child. It's cheaper, but it's better for the child. And there's not that many things that cost a fortune that's actually better for the child.
It boils down to the old favourite, the unknown knowns and the known unknown knowns, and where that sits in being able to budget, but and also then the legislative elements that come into it as well. I hope that was helpful. But Marcus, one thing to remember: in this room, there's no such thing as a silly question. but we would rather ask the question than not move at all. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll go on with silly questions. There are various things that come to mind. The biggest obviously is the residential placements and the parent and child, but the unregistered placements, we all know they're illegal. We're between a rock and a hard place. We know that you will be talking with Ofsted all the time about them. How many of those are specifically required by the courts, which puts us between a different rock and a hard place, because the court says you must and Ofsted said you mustn't. So how many of them are specifically ordered by that? And how many of them, and how many of the residential placements are at the moment, as a result of last year having put a stop on the Homes and Horizons project moving forward in the way that it was, and how is that being impacted by that programme now starting again?
I just find the right numbers. So, in terms of children who are currently unregistered, there are currently, so on the system it shows as 8. There are not 8. 3 of those are a system error that is taking some time to resolve, and those children have never been unregistered. They've just got coded wrongly, so that takes it down to 5. One of those 5 is in the court system and moving to a registered placement on the, I think it's the 12th. Another one is moving to a Homes and Horizons home when it opens, probably the end of August. Another one is a 17-year-old with complex issues that would not be resolved were there's no other provision, effectively. And 2 other young people are unlikely to be able to move elsewhere. One could move to a Homes and Horizons home were the capacity that there isn't currently. So we do have an issue in terms of Homes and Horizons homes. We have 5 open and 3 being built effectively. They have been delayed due to capacity, basically, in other corporate teams. There aren't enough staff in other corporate teams to be able to prioritise some of the work that needs to be done in the timescale it needs to be done. I think those teams are trying very hard to prioritise it, but without the staff, they're in teams where it's very difficult to recruit some staff. It has become increasingly difficult to keep these on timescale. So I think all 3 homes are now delayed. So homes 6 and 7 are delayed by between 4 and 6 months, and home 8 is delayed by about 3 to 4 months. So it is having an impact in children being able to come home, and obviously it's also having an impact on savings, because we know that Homes and Horizons for the most complex children is significantly lower cost than unregistered placement.
What impact? Is it quantifiable?
Your microphone.
Sorry, is it quantifiable, the impact?
In terms of
Money.
money,
I mean, we know the impact on the children. It's not you, of course, but I'm taking that one for granted. But what's the impact on the budget? Because that's where we are at the moment in the discussion.
I couldn't quantify it overall, but the impact per child. So the most expensive child in unregistered placement at the moment, I think, is just under £20,000 a week, and a Homes and Horizons home is just over a quarter per child.
I'm just conscious that we're starting. One of the things that you will all know that I hate, it was to start talking about young people being the drain. It's the placement that I want to be clear that we're sticking to, because it's the young person isn't the one. So, and we have had conversations before about the expensive nature of it. I think, forgive me for putting words in your mouth, Francis, but perhaps, are you suggesting that the executive look at putting in place as much support to allow any blockers that are within the council's control to be minimised?
That is precisely my point, because the children's budget, the children's services cannot do anything about delays that come because it hasn't been possible to provide the corporate support that's needed. So yes, absolutely, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you. Just to add to that, and is that I think I've said in this room or similar rooms before that we have the Children's Transformation Board, and then it's another board and another meeting, and that doesn't always fill people with joy. But the thing about that particular thing is it's a group of people chaired by an independent, completely independent person, an experienced person, and what he does at every one of our meetings is look at what are the things that we need to escalate from the board into the wider corporate arena to just identify where those blocks are. So just say, you know, we're kind of on it, but I just wanted to assure you that the kind of thing is happening. But I really appreciate the nudge because it is really important.
So just before I bring anyone else in, Francis, so are you suggesting that we might want to make a note in our minutes along the lines of that the committee? Okay. So hypothetically then, so are we suggesting that the committee may want to make a note and make a recommendation or ask the executive if they're able to both highlight any council related blockers and then try to resolve them? Does that make, Fiona's writing down, so members, are we content with that as a recommendation? Is there any objection? Okay, then that'll come from this committee then to the executive. We'll clarify the wording afterwards, but I think the direction of travel is there. So this committee would like to understand, or ask the executive to understand if there are any blockers to resolving or reducing some of the potential overspend within this element. Okay, thank you. Moving on. So Simon.
Thank you, Chair. My question really relates to budgets again and budget setting, because it appears to me that year on year, I might be wrong here, that there seems to be an overspend in children's, also adults, and it's whether the budget setting is realistic in the first place. I know there's pressures to say we don't want to spend more than X amount, but when we're setting the budget, if it's not realistic, you're always going to underspend. With the residential placements, I noticed that the budgeted number of residential placements is 73. Well, we haven't been anywhere near that and probably never will be. So it's whether when that process is happening, whether we're being totally realistic.
I think the budget was set on the basis of some very clear modelling, which I think at the time we did the modelling, the financial modelling, we were all very confident or reasonably confident in. The issue we have is that the number of children coming into care has risen by 15%, and we were not expecting that because the number of children in care has been reasonably consistent for a very long time, for probably 5-6 years. So that 15% rise was completely unexpected. And the 15% rise is split between children sort of under 2 who are in foster placements largely and going on to permanence. But the other bit of that 15%, so 7.5%, 8%, is 10 to 15-year-olds who have complex needs. And there is some evidence of that being linked to exclusion from school and serious youth violence. That is an issue which means that quite often those children are not able to manage living in a family home. So they move into residential care. And obviously that number of children, so we're looking at about 20-30 children more in residential care than we're expecting, accounts for that gap. And we would want those children to be able to go home or to move into fostering if they can't go home. But we also have the other problem, which is the insufficiency of foster placements, both in the council and nationally in terms of independent fostering agencies. We are making progress in terms of our internal foster homes. Our plan was to increase by 10 net fostering households a year for 3 years. We did that last year. We achieved that. We're on track for this year. But those children, even if we get to those foster homes, are largely not suitable for foster homes. So it will mean that some of the children who have lower level needs in residential care may be able to move into foster care, but it's not going to reduce the cost profile particularly. And the number of children coming into care is still rising. It's rising at a slower rate than it was earlier in the year, but it is still rising, and it is that cohort of complex 10 to 15-year-olds who are still in that group.
Thank you. I'll bring Chris in a second. Just bear with me, just one point, members, just so that you were clear. One of the things that we identified at the last meeting was the increased number of children looked after within Somerset. And one of the things that we did ask then is for a report to be brought back, and that's scheduled for the next meeting. So the service is aware that there is an issue with the increase, and we have a paper coming into the next meeting for us to look at. So as far as the numbers wise, because you've heard me say before, we've always been, wherever anyone asks, we've always been around 500 and something. And we're now, for the first time in my memory, Saturdays in the 600 and something, and that's becoming consistent. So the question we've asked is why, and that's coming back at the next meeting. Christian.
Yeah, just a quick point really to add to what Claire said. So yeah, the children's budget is obviously, as you can imagine, very complex. However, finance and Claire and the team work really closely together down to the actual level of each child. We also expect numbers. So fostering was one thing we expected numbers for. Obviously, that's a lot lower than we budgeted for. Then you put things like Homes to Horizons, obviously the delays and so on and so forth. They do all have quite a big effect on all of the modelling that goes around each child, how long they're going to expect it to be within care and so on. So also we do have independent scrutiny as well. So last year we had a consultant in, Peter Robinson, to look at what we produced as a budget. We also have people too looking at it as well. So we get external consultants looking at all of our assumptions, all of our modelling. We have the unmitigated budget, and then the mitigations such as the YMCA Thrive 16 plus contracts, say fostering, Homes to Horizons. But obviously then there are as you said, the known unknowns and so on, which then come into play, which is kind of, so there is a very, very in-depth process for the budget process for children's, but sometimes we do have the unknowns knowns as well. But we do build in as much as we can into that. Obviously there is a pressure to make savings as well, but there is a lot of work going on around contracts, Homes to Horizons, all these things that are actually saving money. We just can't stop the numbers coming in. Also, there's some of the blockages around social housing. So again, children moving on and so on and so forth. So there's all sorts of different dynamics as to how we are, where we are. And it is very difficult to do as an exercise, but as many mitigations are built in as possible. But it is say, scrutinised externally. But yeah, for Claire and the team, it's extremely difficult.
And just, I not that I need to, but the members were that's not necessarily challenging the rationale. It's just bringing it forward. That's all. So that obviously we understand the pressures that everyone under. I've got two people left to speak, and then we'll look to move on. So Councillor Ham in the room, Pauline, and then I'll bring John Hunt in online.
Yes, just possibly another stupid question, that maybe not stupid question. The number of children, young people that are being excluded for behaviour from schools, and therefore the knock-on effect of them being taken into care. If there was money redirected or a higher budget to go into mainstream schools to improve the SEND support within a school, would that not save exponentially the amount of money that's then incurred by them going into foster care?
It's a really good point. It's really complicated. I'll try and explain it. So I'm not saying that every child who's excluded from school is coming into care. The children who are excluded from school are more at risk of being involved in serious youth violence. And because of that and the pressures of that on their family are therefore more at risk of coming into care. But it's a really small proportion of the children who are excluded from school who do come into the care system because of having got involved in other things, including serious youth violence. So the budgets for the local authority in terms of children in care are the revenue grant, which comes straight from central government. There is a different grant, the dedicated schools grant, that is there specifically for schools and for working with schools, providing funding for schools and funding for children with special educational needs. Those two budgets can't really overlap. They deal with separate things, and they're both quite rigid in what they can be spent on. So it's difficult to look at doing that differently. What we are looking at doing is we do need to do work, you're exactly right, in terms of schools being able to be more inclusive. So keeping children in school, particularly children with SEND needs. And we're doing some work at the moment with finance, looking at what's called banding. So the amount of money that schools get for children with specific needs at different levels and which schools they go to and how that all works, in order to amend the banding structure. We've worked with schools on this to make it easier for schools to keep children in school because they have the right level of funding to support them to be able to keep that child and work with that child in the school system. So I think that is going through the sort of whole discussion committee process. I suspect it will come here at some point for discussion. Changing those, that's a huge piece of work. You know, the dedicated schools grant is over £400 million. We have to use it in specific ways. Changing the banding is quite a complicated thing to do. So we are doing it and doing it at pace, but it's not the fastest thing that's going to happen. So we are working in other ways to try and, with the police and with other local organisations, to try and identify those children who are at risk of serious youth violence and exclusion much earlier. And we have done some work internally. We appointed somebody, seconded somebody into a role to do work specifically with schools around children at risk of exclusion, which has been very successful in its first year, to try and identify those children and prevent those issues arising. But there are some children who come in sort of, I describe them as left field, who are the children that come into care who we've never heard of, who've just been excluded without any support having been put around them at an earlier level. And then we're dealing with a crisis rather than an early help sort of graduated model.
Thank you. John, Councillor Hunt.
Yes, good morning, Chair. Thank you very much. Actually, most of what I was going to ask has been asked, as ever. But just a comment I'd like to make, going back to Councillor Cravis's point. It's interesting that every new member of this committee, and me included, really, you always feel a bit silly or stupid. I think has been mentioned as well about asking the questions. But what is always interesting to me is most of the questions which, when you start with this might be a stupid question, always seem to be the most logical and sensible that come out. So I think from a newbie's perspective, whether we all are or some of us are, it certainly gives, I think it's a perspective which really helps this committee, because from a newbie's perspective, sometimes you look from the outside and you think, what? You have no clue what everyone's talking about, and you don't have any clue why we do things. And actually, sometimes it does get things changed, which is important. Just very quickly on one question that hasn't been asked, back on slide 3, so the one before the one that's up at the moment, it's showing an amount for other with a 1.3 million overall variance on it, which is the bottom of external placements there, under Thrive 16 plus. I just wonder what that 1.3 overall variance was.
Who wants to talk about the other?
Yeah, so that will include some of the other placement types.
Could you introduce yourself, just so to... Need to turn the mic on.
Sorry. Siobhan Cleverly, Finance Service Manager for Children's Services. So yeah, that value will include some of the other placement types at the smaller values. So we've just lumped it under kind of one. So it'll be a number of other small placement types, which will include the IFA, parent and child, remand placements, secure placements, and some of the other costs that we've got built in there for costs that we transfer over to KILF for some placements provided from there, and the leaving care accommodation costs as well.
Sean, thank you for that. Could I just ask that perhaps you just give us a paragraph in relation that relates to that, just to clarify what it is, and if you circulate it through Fiona, she can give it to members of the committee. It saves us having to go back. So just what are the other in relation to that, and just then we can at least circulate it between me and we can close that loop off so that we can. That'll answer your question, John.
It does. Thank you, Lee.
As far as the questions go, there's a couple of points I wanted to quickly make before I look to move on. Members of this committee, at any point during this meeting, if you find that this is something you don't understand or would like further clarification on, make a note of it and then either drop me an email or drop our clerk an email, or even our executive member, because I know through personal experience, between meetings, that our service would love the opportunity to give members some more information in detail. It may sound they may be a little bit frustrated about having to find the time to do it, but the officers would really appreciate members reaching out, and because going to the front line and seeing things in operation is a really beneficial learning opportunity. And I can't make a big enough point about that. You do hear that our staff are working hard and have time restraint, but the benefit of a member going and having a look how things are done in reality is immense. It's priceless in as far as that. And I've made the point before about if you're unsure of something, if you want to understand an area a little bit better, then ask that question, and I will help, and I know our senior leaders will help find a way to facilitate that, even to the point of if you find you have a half a day spare in a couple of weeks' time, write to one of them, and we'll either put you in touch with the local operations office, or find a way to, or even go to a school or education team, anything. So the opportunity, the frustration for me sitting here, having sat here for such a long time, is I do take a lot of things in. One of the things we try to do is, as a new committee comes in place, is to take them on the journey of education. But there's a limit to how many times we can go around in that circle. And one of my biggest frustrations is the fact that I welcome all the members in this room for taking the time to volunteer to be in on this committee, but we have to keep restarting every now and again. That's why a little bit of consistency to a committee helps build the information base, the knowledge base that you have. So there's no, make a note of any questions you're unsure of. I'm happy to spend time after the meeting trying to find, or even, as I say, if you find some time, let's get you into an office, a local office near to you, so you can maybe find out a little bit more, or even follow, follow a young person's journey through the service is also an interesting one. Okay, finish that advert before I start talking about foster placements and governorships. Any other questions in relation to budget? Claire, did you want to?
Sorry, I'm just going to put the next item. Would it be possible to swap the next two items around, because the police and I may need to leave early?
So you want to bring item 8 forward?
That would be possible. Tom has said that he'd be happy to do that if you as the chair are willing to move the agenda.
Okay. Any objections? Okay, so moving on then, we're going to move on to item 8 of our agenda, which is the Joint Targeted Area Inspection presentation. What I won't do is try to figure out who's going to be speaking, Claire. Perhaps if you want to introduce it and introduce who's with you. Members, so we're moving on to agenda item 8. Claire.
Thank you very much. So I have with me today Lisa Simpson, who is the Area Commander for Avon and Somerset Constabulary. And on the screen at the top right-hand corner, we have Maria Davis, who is the designated nurse for safeguarding, who works for the ICB. I thought I had such a loud voice. I'm getting worried now. So this item is in relation to an inspection that occurred at the end of May this year. This was a joint area targeted inspection called a JTI for short. And it's an inspection that is undertaken by all 4 inspectorates in relation to children who may be at risk of or affected by serious youth violence. It only relates to children over the age of 10 because that's the age of criminal responsibility. So the inspection was undertaken by the Care Quality Commission in relation to health services. So that's health services in the community and the hospitals locally. The Inspectorate for the Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, obviously in relation to the police and the fire and rescue response to children, those in that group. Ofsted in relation to social care and local authority and school services, and also His Majesty's Inspectorate for Probation in relation to youth justice services, who are obviously very relevant to this group. I can't stress strongly enough that this is not an inspection just of the local authority. It is an inspection of the area, so the geographical area of Somerset and the whole system response in relation to serious youth violence for children over 10 in the area, which is why it's very helpful to have colleagues from the police and health here today to show that sort of joint response and the need to work together. So in relation to the headline findings for this inspection, it was not a positive outcome. The headline findings were under several sections, but in terms of the key headlines, partnership working was found to not be effective at a strategic level. So strategically, this work around serious youth violence, the statutory duty in relation to that is held by the Community Safety Partnership in Somerset. and also is supported effectively and worked with the Safeguarding Children Partnership in Somerset. And both those groups should be identifying, understanding and responding to serious youth violence and criminal exploitation in order to reduce that and prevent the increase of that in Somerset. That is not happening effectively. That is what the inspection outcome was. And the oversight of that work they described as lacking rigour, drive and challenge. We are really worried by that and really upset that we have got to that point and that we haven't been seeing what's going on in the community in the way that we should have done. And we are all determined to improve that for children and young people in Somerset. In terms of multi-agency practice, inspectors went to lots of settings. They went out into communities, talked to people in communities, talked to staff in various different settings, in different organisations. And what they identified there were concerns in terms of basic practice. So they identified specifically in emergency departments in the 2 local hospitals that the oversight of safeguarding and appropriate referrals to children's social care were poor, that there was not good oversight or good practice in relation to safeguarding in emergency departments. They also identified a lack of information sharing by the police with partners, particularly in terms of intelligence information relating to serious youth violence and criminal exploitation, which obviously impacts on the whole system's ability to respond. They noted, as we've already discussed this morning, a very high rate of exclusions from Somerset schools, and in a national context, as I've already described, of that making children much more susceptible to serious youth violence if they're not in a school setting, and that's particularly relevant for children with SEND needs. And they also identified a lack of system-wide training in relation to serious youth violence. So to be fair to schools, some schools have brought that in individually where they're particularly concerned, but there should be a systematic, system-wide training programme for serious youth violence, and we would expect that to be delivered or overseen, commissioned by the Safeguarding Children Partnership. So if we move to the next slide, they did identify some good practice. So I think the first point is probably the most interesting, in that when we know there's immediate risk to children in this area, the whole system responds well. And they were very confident that when there was an issue identified in relation to immediate risk to a child of serious youth violence or exploitation, the whole system comes together and works really well. What doesn't work well is understanding the factors that lead to that sort of crisis point, that we're not sharing information well, we're not identifying things early enough. So in terms of local neighbourhoods, when they went out to visit particular neighbourhoods and areas of the county, they found some local areas were really responding proactively to concerns in their local area and diverting children from violence well. They also found that when CAMS, the Adolescent Mental Health Service, was referred to and children were accepted in that service, they got a good response from CAMS. The Youth Justice Service was praised for its knowledge of serious youth violence and working with individual children affected. But that service deals with children who are in the criminal justice system because of serious youth violence. So they are effectively a subset of that first bullet point. That's where children are at immediate risk and in crisis. And that service works really well. It's a multi-agency service. It has local authority staff, a seconded police officer, a seconded probation officer. So it's a really good microcosm of good working. And they're also they spoke very well of the out of hours duty system in children's social care, that team has really good understanding of serious youth violence and works very well and effectively with the police because they're based at Bridgewater House. So in Bridgewater at the police station, so they work very closely with the out of hours and custody teams in the police. They also identified that some locally commissioned services, largely in the voluntary sector, that help children in the early stages of serious youth violence were doing very well with those children, but they were patchy and they were individual services, not a system-wide approach. So in terms of what we need to do about this, so we're already collating action plans. There was a meeting of the Community Safety Partnership yesterday where we talked about what we needed to do as a system to be able to improve this for children. We are already putting together those action plans and to make sure that we are really clear about what we're going to do. And as the chair said, that will be brought to the next scrutiny committee for you to have a look at. The plan has to be submitted, an overarching plan to Ofsted by the chair of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, who is currently me. on behalf of the 3 safeguarding partners. So the safeguarding partners for Somerset are the Chief Exec of the Council, the Chief Exec of the Integrated Care Board, and the Chief Constable for Avon and Somerset Police. That has to be delivered or sent to Ofsted by the 25th of October. That's the date set by the inspectorates. We intend to submit that in September because we are ahead of the game in terms of understanding what we need to do and are already working on the actions in those action plans. We aren't just sitting and waiting for a plan to be submitted before we start to do the work. It was a disappointing and very worrying outcome in terms of that inspection. And I think it has made us all think very hard about the work that we're doing and what we know. I keep using this phrase, but I think it's still relevant. You know what I'm going to say there. I think we have been reassured rather than assured about what's going on in Somerset. I think that's partly to do with the fact that most people working at the senior level in terms of community safety and in safeguarding children all know each other well professionally, and we all trust each other. In some situations, that's a really good thing, but I think it has affected our ability to look deeply and to be very challenging of each other. So we are planning a workshop in the next few weeks for both the Safeguarding Exec and the Community Safety Partnership leadership groups to be able to have some external facilitation about how we challenge each other effectively to move into that assurance place rather than being reassured. And obviously I have colleagues here who are happy to give their perspective on the action plans for their organisations and also to take any questions.
Members, before I just wondered whether I could want to introduce the colleagues, so the two colleagues that are with us, and then maybe if they want to add a little bit to they're welcome to do so.
Okay, so Lisa Simpson, you can introduce yourself, can't you? Don't you?
Oh, it works. There we go. Technology and me, sorry. So yes, Lisa Simpson. So I'm the area commander for Somerset and North Somerset. And I think that it helps to understand the role here because the governance, we all accepted in when we were meeting with the inspectors and in the report, the governance of our complex areas has not helped here. And when we were in the actual inspection, we all understood that at the senior level. But I think what the final report tells us is actually the governance throughout, be it the governance in individual agencies or in terms of overseeing serious youth violence is where we have come unstuck here, would be our view. And the simplest example I can give of that is that I'm responsible for the neighbourhood policing responses in Somerset and North Somerset. I have neighbourhood teams for community work, for community reassurance, but actually I don't have the responsibility for children in the force. That's a peer of mine. I don't have the responsibility for adults. That's a different peer. And we recognise that in policing, that sort of overall lack of having a streamlined focus so that the governance for children and adults in Somerset can sit with me would have definitely helped here. But that plays out throughout. And in the SSP meeting and the Safer Somerset Partnership meeting yesterday, the governance of overseeing violence reduction, for example, again is complex. We all sit in multiple meetings talking about the same themes but with different action plans, different owners, and we're working really hard now within the action plan of this to unpick that, to sort it out, to make it cleaner so that the actions are fewer, well owned and you know across the conflicting themes, you know, having an all age approach that services everyone equally. The only other point I would add on there around the intelligence bit, which Claire has rightly highlighted, is about we don't know what we don't know, and where we escalate intelligence and how we do that with partners in policing clearly is flawed, as this report tells us. So what we know and what we share are two different things, and we're working really hard to put that right. So I just wanted to add those points, but yeah, obviously very happy to take the questions. Thank
you. Maria, do you want to introduce yourself and if you add anything?
Yeah, morning all. My name is Maria Davis. I'm the designated nurse for safeguarding children for Somerset ICB, and I wasn't quick enough earlier. I'm here instead of Sheila Meldrum, who sends her apologies. She's the chief nursing officer for the ICB. She's on annual leave. So for me, I suppose the additional bit I wanted to say from the health system perspective is very much echoing what Claire's already said, in part that the inspection itself was a really painful process for us to go through on many levels, but most particularly the outcome. But it's also, call me optimistic, it is that opportunity for us to really take stock, to look at what systems and processes we've got in place and what can we do differently to actually ensure that we are safeguarding our children and young people more effectively. And just some additional assurance, and even as I'm using that word, I'm thinking, is that reassurance or is that assurance? Because that also is resonating. From an assurance perspective, actually the health system, like many other partner agencies in the inspection, we're not waiting until we submit the action plan. As Claire has already said, we have actively undertaken some actions and sought from the ICB, obviously have oversight of the health system, and NHS Somerset Foundation Trust was named within that letter, particularly around a number of concerns regarding specific children, and we sought immediate additional information and clarity regarding those children in an effort to better understand the concerns that the inspectors had actually raised. Immediate assurance was also sought at a executive level by Sheila from Hayley Peters, the Chief Nursing Officer in SFT. And then more latterly has been the development of that system-wide, health system-wide action plan that will be overseen and scrutinised by the ICB. And we've set up monthly meetings with safeguarding leads from across the health system, such as Public Health, South West Ambulance Service, NHS Foundation Trust, to really primary care feature within that as well, to really look at what are the actions that we've agreed to at a health system level, but also at a partnership level, because very much it is about how can we better understand what serious youth violence and exploitation looks like in Somerset, and what do we need to do better to respond to these children and young people. Much resonating throughout the Ofsted letter is earlier identification and response, so that we can try and prevent those children and young people being drawn into serious youth violence or exploitation. And I think I'll stop there and take a breath.
Maria, thank you. You nicely put me on to my first question for a bit of clarification, really. The report talks about serious youth violence, but my question was going to be, what does that include? Because are we talking the likes of, you brought in exploitation? I know the answer, Claire, but I just want the rest of the room to understand it's not just youth violence that this covers. Is that correct? And does exploitation include the likes of county lines and elements like that, please?
So we could look the definition up for you and send it out with the minutes, but it would include the county lines, and criminal exploitation includes things like county lines, drug running, sexual exploitation of children by adults for financial gain. So it does include a very wide range of issues. And I think one of the things that came out of this, particularly in relation to that definition, was seeing children who have become involved in exploitation and serious youth violence as perpetrators of violence, and not necessarily in all organisations understanding that becoming a perpetrator probably comes from some level of victimisation, that something has happened to them which has meant that they have started to commit that sort of crime. Not seeing those children as children effectively in terms of them needing support and help, and seeing them as just in a criminal aspect is something that we need to move away from very, very quickly.
Yeah, so I was desperately trying to, I had the whirl of doom there, which is not loading anything, but we will get that out. And it's as usual, not a simple definition. And it doesn't just include, I know that you'll all know this, but people under the age of 18 either, so it stretches further than that. But yeah, it's all forms of exploitation and early intervention in that exploitation. And we talk about perpetrator focus in Avon and Somerset. You know, that's really part of our language for the last 12 months, where we're trying to be victim supportive and perpetrator focused. For children, that's very, very different, because in being perpetrator focused, what the report clearly tells us is we've lost that lens of they fundamentally are victims.
Thank you. I wanted to make the point so members understood that it wasn't the title may indicate a limited area, but we're talking a vast area of young people's safety on this. I've got a couple of members who've indicated, so I'll bring the Vice Chair Evie in first.
Hi, thank you for the report. I live in one of the most deprived areas of Somerset in Yeovil, and I also have children in my care. I foster. My concern is I live right on the border of Dorset, and it's great to see these partnerships working here, but how strong are your partnerships with other counties? Because my children do spend a lot of time hopping across to the next town, which is in a completely different county.
That's a really key question. We know that criminals know that we've got borders within constabulary areas, so I'm not saying that it's perfect. With county lines and with exploitation, of course, we've got regional policing responses, for example. So there's, in fact, the regional crime team are downstairs today, where they are looking across the intelligence that's mapped across the whole of the southwest and responding appropriately. And that really does come into effect with drug and exploitation work. So there is a really good intelligence. I say that sat here with a report in front of me that says we're not very good at sharing intelligence. So I'm guarded. But in terms of drug intelligence and exploitation, we do have a system in policing that does that very well. In neighbourhood policing, whether it's child exploitation, rural crime, whatever it is, we are trying to talk to our counterparts across border and share policies and practice. But I know that there's work to do. And in terms of the way that the SSCP, the Safeguarding Children's Partnership, works across borders, I genuinely, that's a really good question because I don't know.
So the Safeguarding Partnership would work across borders. There's a national network of Safeguarding Children Partnerships. It's the practical sort of operational reality that is more difficult. So we would work with children's social care, would work across borders, as would health would work across borders, as would the police. I think the bit that comes through this inspection is that strategic overlay, that we're not working well strategically across all the different organisations in Somerset and across borders too, in terms of what do children need rather than the silo bits of the organisation. So clearly you're exactly right that children do move across borders, as do perpetrators in terms of adult perpetrators, and we need to form stronger system relationships across borders rather than just in individual organisations.
Can I ask the police if they'd please put across to their new crime commissioner that we'd like to see more bleed kits? We currently have one, which is in one of our parks. We don't have anything on our town centre. We'd like to see more, please.
Yeah, noted. Thank you.
Thank you. Alistair, Councillor Hendry.
A question really for Claire, I think. As I understand it, children in this country in our care have got a legal right to give them education up to the age of 16. Is that correct? Am I right in saying that?
You say that again?
The children in our care in this country have got a legal right to be educated up to the age of 16. Is that correct or not correct? That's the first thing.
Children have a legal entitlement and a duty to be educated to the age of 18.
18. Okay, well that's even more so. I thought it was 16. I'm living in the past, I think. If a child violence or whatever crime you want, but it's sexual or violence, regardless, gets excluded from school at the age of 14, do we as a council have to pay a fee over and above to have them go to a workshop or a specialist school or one-to-one to pay them continuing on until the 18, as you say, or do they just be excluded for a time and then return to the same school, or how does this work? I'm unclear on this.
It's quite complicated. So a child can be suspended from school multiple times for periods of a day or longer, and then they can be permanently excluded from that school. When they're permanently excluded from that school, the local authority has a duty to provide a level of education by day 6 post-exclusion, which is just over a week. That provision is unlikely to be another school because another school may not accept them at that point. And we do know that we have issues with what that day 6 post provision looks like. And we know that we have schools where it is difficult to get a child back into a different school once they've been excluded because schools are struggling with the children they already have. So there is a system. It's a system that it is creaking, I think, locally and in some other local authorities. Some local authorities have got it right, and we're trying to learn from those other local authorities. But it is something we've got to that we are working on very hard with schools to get the right children, well, to get children into full-time education. Every child in Somerset should have a full-time education, and they don't currently. We need to sort that out.
Just one last thing there, bottom line then, that this is actually costing the council more money because a child is taken out because he's been excluded from mainstream school. So that suddenly costs us money to do something else to move forward.
Again, the budget in relation to education is not the local authority's budget. So it's a national budget, and the school's grant budget. We are overspending on that budget because we do not have sufficient places for children to be in mainstream schools or in special schools, and we're having to pay independent non-maintained schools very high amounts of money to take some of the children with particular special education needs or disabilities. Although that's not a local authority budget, how can I explain it? The government underwrite effectively the money, the overspend on that budget. So where we have reserves, we can effectively manage that overspend through the reserve. If we don't have reserves, then we have to borrow money to manage that overspend. We're not required by the government to pay back that overspend, but we do have to sort of service that overspend in terms of having the money available to service the debt. So it's a bit of a double-edged sword. But we are trying to reduce that overspend, but because the education system is so complex and we're having to work in lots of different ways to try and increase the number of children who can be in mainstream schools, because it's better for children to be in school local to their own community with their own friends. And that will also secondarily have an impact on reducing the overspend because it's cheaper for children to be in a mainstream school than an independent non-maintained.
And also, Alistair, maybe if again, it's a big if it's something you want to gain more understanding on, I would welcome someone on this committee to have a better understanding of this, because as we head towards the designated school grant overspend and all the SEND education and stuff, so maybe if you consider reaching out after the meeting, I'll find a way to try and build your knowledge base around that. So it would be very helpful for the committee. Thank you. Next up, we have Marcus. Councillor Kravis, please. Davis.
Chair, thank you for that. I don't know, it's not stupid questions. I just feel the whole thing's moved above my pay level, actually. I was just trying to get my head around it. I was a bit surprised, it says the lack of information shown by police and partners, etc. Because I thought we had things like the want team, etc. that I thought were quite useful. But obviously, this is not something that's just happening. So the question, I suppose, is who would those partners be, etc., etc. Because I mean, and I'm going to go a bit off tangent here, maybe, but maybe not. I was speaking to a casework, someone who's got currently 4 children and sharing a bedroom. Now, I imagine the stress going on in that household because we have enough trouble when all our kids turn up and we got lots of space. And is there a knock-on effect to that? So does that, apart from the sharing information, does that include things like our own housing teams? Do we trust them to be? Is it relevant if we've got problems with housing? Is there a knock-on effect to that happening? And then are we happy that our housing team's actually doing the job they should be doing, or should they be sharing information if they've got any concerns? Because actually they probably get the stress, you'll get a feeling of the stress straight away. But I suppose my question on that one, I've probably got 2 questions here. My question on that one is, how soon and how quickly can we solve this problem? Because it says the 25th of October. Well, a lot can happen in a couple of months, I suppose. So, or are we going to put a report back in the 25th of October of, this is what we're going to do, when actually should we putting a report in on the 25th of October this is what we're doing now? That will solve that one. And also on the information sharing, because obviously you talked about the schools and you talked about people being excluded, etc. Then the conversation moved on to exploitation in county lines. Well, I had quite an interesting conversation with an 18-year-old the other day, and I was giving a little story about a county lines issue and etc. etc. And I think her response was, we did have one little chat in school about county lines. And I was a bit gobsmacked that, they should be having a chat about county lines every term in school about what was going on, etc. And I mean, I don't think I'm, streetwise or anything, but I obviously knew a lot more about it than she did, and she's that age, and that was quite shocking. The lack of understanding from someone who just left school, and this is an intelligent person. This wasn't, So I was quite shocked. I was quite shocked at that. And how can we start at the beginning and get the children educated? I know there might be. Well, and there was another question as well that I sort of had leading on from that. But I think I've forgotten it. Well, I've forgotten it. It wasn't. It's I probably picked it up already. But for me, that information sharing is probably really how soon can we solve that immediate problem that's been highlighted. And I say I was surprised because I thought the one thing. Oh yes, I know what the other bit was. We talked about neighbourhood policing, etc., etc. And we talk about things like exploitation and county lines. Well, in a lot of small communities, most people know who the drug dealers are. If you turned up in Minot, you'd all know who the drug dealers were. Yet, how come, a year down the line, they're still the local drug dealers, and how's that happening? That's not. I'm trying not to be urban myth and talk about hearsay, etc., etc. But it's been going. Yeah, I should think it happens in all communities in Somerset where everybody knows who they are.
Before you come, Marcus picked up one of my points in relation to I think we need to understand obviously data sharing across the community, but also internal silos as well, how to address those. I think that covers sort of it, the big.
I know we'll both want to come in here, and there's quite a lot of points there. So firstly, to talk about, I'll go backwards first. Drug dealers, or everyone knowing them, I think you're right. Everyone can see in their communities where there's pockets of illegal practice. But the point is everyone doesn't know, because the subtlety with county lines and exploitation of children is that it's not obvious necessarily on the streets. Now, I'm not trying to be defensive, because of course there are pockets of obvious behaviours, but this is more subtle. This is about building trust and confidence and grooming. Just as we talk about grooming and sexual offending, this is very much what happens in county lines. So the intelligence picture is key in terms of who sees what, but it's also got to be a lot more subtle and honed than that as well. The one team working that you talked about, there are lots of, and I think the report talks about it, there's very good pockets of local practice where frontline practitioners know their children, know their families, know their people that are more vulnerable. Really good pockets of that, and then as many different ways of working in that group as there are pockets of good practice. So we haven't got consistency, and that really is highlighted here. So, and actually the one team working has had variable success, hasn't it? It's had great successes in some areas, but not everywhere. And it's gone through various pockets of morph now, so that actually what is the one team? Because the one team in Wellington is very different than the one team is in Taunton. And actually there isn't a one team in all of our high intensity areas either. So, Lucy McCready's been brought in to look at that. And I know that that's all to do with funding as well. So there's things that we did well once that we need to do well again. And we need to think, where are we investing in that? So one team is part of the partnership focus. In terms of that, what are we telling that we've done on the 25th by the 25th of October? Like Claire said, we are putting our action plan in well ahead of that. And that action plan, which I actually got printed out in hard copy here, I don't expect that you can see it. It is reams. It's tens and tens and tens of actions across individual agencies and the collective. So the Violence Reduction Partnership, which is the collection of a lot of us, all the agencies, and a lot of us already here. That has its own set of actions. Police has its own set of actions. I think there's 11 for policing, for example. So some of those will have work already attached to it when we submit it, but largely none of it will be complete. I think some of the shortest deadlines are for the autumn term, if you like, and then it goes through all the way through to next year. So we're not going to complete all of it immediately, but all of the problems that they've highlighted have got an immediate plan, and as quickly as we can do it, we'll do it. And finally, from me, the bit about intelligence sharing, the bit we've been criticised about is that the police probably do know from housing a lot, from social care a lot, from the local community talk group a lot. The criticism is that we don't necessarily get that together and quickly cascade it to the agencies that are there to support the children. So that was the criticism of intel sharing. It's about we're receiving it and then keeping it. But in every pocket of all the agency working, there's intelligence known and not shared. It's just that police has been highlighted as perhaps knowing the most, and you'd expect us to, wouldn't you? Because everyone should be telling us about criminal behaviour, and we're not necessarily then disseminating that the way that we should.
Claire, Maria, did you want to come in any points in relation to respond to Marcus?
Yeah, I was going to respond in relation to the information sharing question in the action plan. Lisa stole my thunder and she's already said what I was going to say around the action plan. The only additional bit I was going to say that for me very much resonated with that reassurance versus assurance is not just about completing actions outlined on the action plan, is how are we then constructively looking at, did we do what we said we'd do, and then what evidence do we have that actually has had that desired impact, and are we actually, as a result of those action plans, actually more effective at safeguarding children? And that takes from serious youth violence and exploitation, and that takes a much longer process because it's not until you've put those actions in place and then you want to evaluate. So for me, the evaluation is absolutely integral to any action plan. And then in terms of information sharing, I've been part of an information sharing task and finish group led by the Safeguarding Children Partnership, and directly as a result of the publication of the Working Together to Safeguarding Children in December and in May, non-statutory guidance around information sharing for safeguarding practitioners. Actually, there's been an understanding information and sharing and consent toolkit developed as part of the Safeguarding Children partnership to really tackle that, who needs to share with whom and what's the legal gateway for that information sharing, because absolutely resonating with the letter from the JTI is about that earlier identification, and once you're earlier identification, it is then having that conversation with other practitioners involved. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you. I just build on the data thing just very quickly. Claire will know that I've been harping on about data sharing for years now, and it's frustrating that we're still at this point. So what I will is I put my head above the parapet, Claire. I express an interest in understanding what we're trying to do to break down those barriers to data sharing. So as a member outside of this meeting, if you could facilitate maybe somewhere to link me in so I can understand what's being done, because one of the points that I've said before, when you have little Johnny that's identified as number XYZ by the council, it then is known by something else by the police and something else by the NHS, their NHS number. That information isn't necessarily shared. And that is how we overcome those barriers, which I think is important. So do you want to come back?
Yeah, so just to be clear, this report is very specific about information sharing by the police with partners, not partners to the police. So there is a system called Transform, which is working really well, which pulls together all the information about vulnerable families from various organisations, the NHS, police, the DWP, voluntary sector, drug and alcohol services, to identify those children and families that are more vulnerable. That works well. What happened in this inspection, and Lisa can correct me if I get this wrong, is that the police have two things. So there's a portal which anybody, including members of the public, can report intelligence or concerns they have into the police. The police do not currently have the capacity to look at all the information that goes into that portal in enough depth, which is one of the issues of concern. And there was also an issue in relation to information being shared back from the police, if you like, in terms of police looking at their intelligence information from various sources and not effectively sharing with other partners appropriately intelligence information that might be relevant to children under 18. I don't want to give any more detail than that. So the information was held in the police system, and I think, as Lisa's already described, there's a lot of work going on in the police to understand that and to work through how they can effectively identify which intelligence should be shared and with who, and how to manage those systems so that information is shared quickly and appropriately with the relevant people.
Thank you for that clarification. And to Lisa as well, I'll put my head above the parapet. If there is anything that I can link into to gain some better understanding of, I will. But however, we will then wait for the action plan at the next meeting so that we can see where we're moving forward on that. Thank you. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got a couple of things I want to say and some questions. I do think there's a temptation for all of us to see things in extremes, either as all good or all bad. For those of us who like reading fiction, it wouldn't hurt to reread Oliver Twist, which said it all 170 years ago. And added, just added to that one, it really worries me if there's a too much of a children can be victims as well as perpetrators. They might turn 18, they may well still be victims as well as perpetrators, and that's a really important. But getting this right is going to be a long-term thing. Clearly, it's not the duration of the action plan. It's about the quality of the practice that comes out of it and continues in the long term. I just sort of example, the agreement to share information doesn't mean it'll be shared. It's about the quality of practice. Yes, it's about getting the systems right, but it's also about the understanding. And for me, past experience has I think shows that arranged and prepared for meetings of workforces between partners isn't actually the best way to make sure that practice improves and everybody understands practice. I know you're developing the action plan, but are there now plans for frontline people to drop in on each other, probably unannounced, just turning up and being part of it, at the operational level, actual frontline people visiting other people's frontline work, team managers seeing each other's teams across the different agencies, multi-agency auditing, DIP audits, and then choice of, following up with that with choice of cases for looking at, but random DIP audits as well. Is that all going to be part of the action plan?
Yeah, so that is part of the action plan. Thank you. So we have a quality assurance process already in the Safeguarding Children Partnership, where we look at a number of children a year as a multi-agency system to see what the work looks like and the quality of work across the system in particular themes. We are obviously now going to focus on serious youth violence for a period and increase the number of audits that we do. And that auditing will now include going into organisations on a largely unannounced basis with multi-agency groups of staff, including frontline practitioners, to talk to frontline practitioners in those organisations about their understanding of the particular topic of that audit. So serious youth violence, what training have they had, what impact has that training had on their practice, have they had an experience of dealing with children with serious youth violence, what did they do, did they feel supported, etc., to try and get a temperature check from the front line. We do a statutory audit once a year. It's called Section 11. I always get the number wrong, but I think it's Section 11, across every organisation about safeguarding in general. And that gets sort of internally graded. So this will give us an opportunity to actually understand whether the understanding of people at the senior level of what's actually happening in their organisation is accurate when we start to talk to people on the front line about their experience of safeguarding, and in this instance, safeguarding children at risk of serious youth violence.
I made a note to look at who oversees the overseers, or who brings all this together, and I think that question sort of started that, and I'll be interested to see in the action plan where it is. Like, I'd written down joint scrutiny to myself, but then I was thinking that's a big old thing if we're looking at it. But obviously the UK, and there's also the acronyms are problematic. We've got the Safeguarding Children Partnership, the Safer Somerset Partnership, and it's understanding where they all fit as well. So I'm sure that's part of the plan. One final question in this section. Simon, Councillor Cowswell.
Thank you very much, Chair. I might ramble on a bit, but I'm not going to ramble as much as some councillors, I promise. I think it's human nature and a tendency to deal with the immediate problem without looking at the whole picture and passing on information. It's a pity that it took the inspection to highlight these issues. And I am aware from personal experience of somebody I knew who worked in adult social care, that when they went to speak to somebody from children's services about a transition, the screen would be turned away from them. So there are silos within organisations, and that may have changed, but that is something that is a bit worrying. And also with the action plan, with action plans, it's easy to say this is done, this is pending, this is yet to be started. But we need to, as the lady said on the screen, we need to keep on evaluating and checking that these things have actually happened and that we are breaking down those barriers. Just a final, just to say as well, sharing data, partnership working is a recurring theme over decades with various awful cases in the press and whatever. Just something completely different. It was good to see that it says CAMS are making a timely response, but I'm aware CAMS has resource issues. So their timely response, I assume, means that they react straight away, but then that child may be put on a waiting list to actually have things done. I mean, I might be wrong. Thank you.
So I'll leave the CAMS question to Maria. Is that right, Maria? Do you want to answer that one?
In terms of CAMS, the level of detail within the inspection didn't get into that. However, my understanding is the reduction down in waiting time is for actual assessment and then treatment, not that there's that initial contact and then they have to wait. I can go away and speak to my mental health commissioning team colleagues to verify, but my understanding from other child safeguarding reviews where emotional mental health and wellbeing support for children and young people was a feature was that actually they had reduced down the waiting time for actual assessment and then ongoing treatment.
Thank you. I was just going to say that to see something good about CAMS is a bonus, considering the journey that we've been on. It would be interesting to understand the depths of that, but I'm sure once Mr. and Mrs. Public read this, and it will feed back in if there are any issues in relation to that. I've finished the questions, the questionnaires. Most of the points which I think that we've covered will be for us to look at in the action plan to see what's being missed or what's being there. So that will come next time. Obviously, we've covered lots of issues and points in relation to this. So I look forward to seeing the action plan and hoping that we'll drill down on that. But I'm sure it will be, but just some reassurance that as part of the action plan, there will be details of who's overseeing it and where it goes, because obviously we've highlighted just today the as this scrutiny committee, we only overlook a small section of it, which is then spread, it crosses a lot of areas. I tried to map out just very quickly down in front of me, and I've got at least 5 or 6 legs off of each of the different overall bodies. And then, so the question I will be asking is how all these are being broken down to make the route easier. Because obviously, just for Somerset, for example, social care, adult services, and all the different elements that then come off of that and how that works. And education then goes into schools where we have academy trusts, local authorities, schools. So that just blew my mind thinking about that for a second. So I look forward to seeing that in the action plan. I'd like to thank Lisa and Maria for joining us today. I know that everyone's busy, but it's important, and this committee always welcomes external partners to come along because it helps the members that understand where we sit in the bigger picture. So thank you for both for taking your time, and I'll draw this item to an end and then allow you to get on with the rest of your business. And thank you. So I'll jump back then. I've just been going for an hour and a half. So what I'll do, I'll jump back on to item number 7, which is Tom to do it. And then what I will do is take a comfort break after that for members before we get to the last item. So I'd like to welcome Tom to the meeting. If you'd like to introduce yourself, Tom, and give us your presentation, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, members. For those that I haven't met before, my name is Tom Rutland. I'm a public health promotion manager / equalities. Essentially, I do things around equality and diversity on behalf of the local authority, predominantly in relation to how we deliver services, how we are corporately providing and responding in relation to it, and how we engage with the communities that we serve. So The paper that you've got in front of you today is a nudge/reminder for scrutinies around their responsibilities in relation to due regard. So to provide a bit of background and context, and apologies, I see a few faces that I've already spoken to about this. Sorry, Marcus. We, as a local authority, invited the Local Government Association in October to complete a peer challenge in relation to our compliance with the with the Equality Framework for Local Government. That's a LGA recognised assessment framework for how local authorities are functioning and performing against equality and diversity and within equality and diversity. It provides us with a guide as to whether we are doing what we should be doing and how effectively we're going about doing that. What it doesn't do is give us a score, but what it does do is give us in areas that we may want to focus additional work on, and then for us to establish an action and where we take that. One of the areas that came out of that review was in relation to the role of scrutiny, and the role of scrutiny specifically in relation to the due regard element of the equality legislation. So that element of the legislation essentially asks all constituent parts of a local authority, so our staff, our elected members, anyone that's engaging with us, to have due regard to three things in everything that we do. So the due regard legislation is not purely for an equality impact assessment, which is where you'll generally see a kind of a record of that due regard. It should be running through everything that we do as much as text through a core of rock, and should be our consideration in all of the things that we do at all of the time. What the equality impact assessment does is pull together that consideration of due regard into an easily digestible document for someone making a decision to be able to go, I understand what's happening and I understand the considerations around due regard, and I have taken that on board as part of my decision making. The challenge that came from the peer challenge was around the role of scrutiny and whether scrutinies were aware of their responsibilities around due regard, and if they were, whether those were being effectively used as part of the scrutiny process. So the paper is essentially to remind scrutinies that they have a duty under the due regard element of the legislation, as all boards and bodies and constituent members of the local authority do, to use it as part of their decision making, as part of their challenge, as part of their consideration in the items that are coming forward to them. Officers presenting items have a responsibility to make sure that they are providing you with the relevant information to be able to have that scrutiny from a due regard perspective in relation to the decisions and the information that is coming forward to you. We will be providing a small briefing. It was due to be a briefing training session. We've changed that to a briefing paper for scrutinies around what could that look like and where could it and how could that manifest in a scrutiny setting, and hopefully we'll be able to provide some additional training for chairs if required around what that may look like and how that is articulated within a scrutiny space. So essentially this is to provide you with a reminder. My last point before I shut up, conscious that a break is looming, is just to remind all members that the duty to have due regard does not diminish because of a financial emergency. So what we do not do is reduce or remove the requirement to have due regard. That consideration to have due regard maintains and continues. Personally, I would say it is even more vital with the decisions that are coming forward for us to fully understand the disproportionate impact on different groups and to understand the impact of the decisions and the changes that we may be making to the services that we provide. Thank you, Chair.
I'll add a little bit to that as well, because I was part of the peer review, and it's also important that all members understand their duties under the Equalities Act and the equalities and in what we do, in how we hold the council to account for their consideration. I know usually, and I'm one of the biggest companies, by the time you get to the end of the report, the equalities impact assessments are probably the last things you want to look at to go through, but it's important that we do that. Tom, a couple of points. You talked about a briefing note as opposed to a briefing. I would suggest that it might be worth, because of the important nature that I consider it as important as everyone else, that you do both, or at least find a way to do both, purely and simply because I'm again speaking personally. Sometimes I miss papers, briefing reports, and notes, and very often, as a member, we're getting a lot of member information, note briefings that are coming out, and we don't necessarily read them. So one of the things that might be worth doing is speaking to Democratic Services, and I'll make it's a formal suggestion for me that we do both, because I think, again, this is my personal perception, some of the failings highlighted by the peer review are pretty important, and we need to be seen to be actively dealing with those before a problem comes along. So I would suggest that we look at both in relation to that. And I would welcome, as a chair, how scrutiny can work better when it comes to equalities issues, and how we look at it, because like I say, sometimes we miss the equalities. If we have to formally ask that question to show that we're dealing with it, to close that circle, then I'm happy to do that. So if that's okay with you, Tom.
Absolutely, Chair. Yep.
I've got a couple of members, so I'll bring in Evie first. Thank you.
Hi, I'd just like to remind members that we have access to training, and I've recently done my equalities training with the children's. It would be good if we could have some links, or people are reminded of how they can get on to this training, because I'm aware that many councillors have absolutely no idea that this is available for them.
Before you come back on that, Tom, I'd just say, so changing hats for a second, as chair of the member development panel, that's one of the things that we have already identified, the fact that members aren't necessarily aware of the ability to access some of the training that's available, online training, and we're currently looking at updating the members' pages on the website to signpost that. But it's absolutely right. I think it might be worth, I'll ask Fiona or Tom to reach into officers around the member development panel in relation to being able to highlight the training opportunities and how members can access those training points.
I have noticed that on the links for the councillors, you can't go back and see that you've actually done any of the training on them. This is something I'd like amended, please.
Don't worry, Tom, I'll take that one on, and we'll that's a really good point. Thank you. I've got no more members in the room. So Andy, Councillor Hadley, welcome to the meeting, sir.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, you stole my thunder a little bit. I mean, somebody who's just suffered a mild stroke, one of the lasting symptoms that I've got is actually being able to focus and read properly. It's getting better by day, but just to be issued a paper rather than a proper briefing would actually affect the way that I can understand that. So I would rather have a briefing at this stage, if that could be possible.
Thank you, and I'll add a bit to that. In that I mentioned about the briefing, and I would ask that perhaps, Tom, could you go back into the service and just see whether we can make it not necessarily a compulsory, but the potential negative, the potential impact of us not taking our responsibilities under equality seriously could be big enough to cost us some money. And I would suggest that along with explore the options of whether it could be mandatory, that element of the training, because I think it would be important for a member to ensure that all members. So I'm having my Ofsted argument in my head. We would need to demonstrate the fact that we've used every opportunity to make sure people are aware, and it may need to be the mandatory route to do that. Members, are there any other questions or points? Tom, thank you. I look forward to seeing the paper, because I personally, I'd like to say, I think it's something we could do. And what I will ask, I'm sure you will, but within the report, it talks specifically about things that scrutiny should be looking at. Particularly, I think it's 1.5, 1.6. It's linked from the paper that you circulated. And members, I will draw your attention to the fact at the bottom of the paper today, there are 3 links, which I think are very important. The middle one would be the one that you may want to look at more than it, which is talking about the responsibilities and the requirements that scrutiny should be doing around the equalities impact assessments and equalities agenda. Have I covered everything, Tom?
You have. Thank you, Chair. You've done very well.
Members, thank you very much for your time. We will pause now for a 10-minute break and resume at 11:20 for the last. So promptly, we move on then to agenda item number 9 today, which is the school transport project. This one's been around, the school transport has been coming to the committee a number of times, and I would suggest that where we are today is obviously we did the task and finish group, made some recommendations to that fed into the system, and we're now back to the review stage and a better understanding of where we are and going forward. So I don't know whether Heather, do you want to introduce this? I picked the ideal moment when she just put a bit of biscuit in her mouth, so I apologise for that. So I'll waffle for a couple of seconds while you take a chance for a gasp of tea just to wash the biscuit down. Heather.
Thank you so much. I did kind of make a bit of a reference to this earlier in the meeting. I'm really pleased to see this report is coming here. And just to say that it's been acknowledged, I think, for a long time that we have had overspends perhaps in our homeschool transport budget. But I think more importantly, I suspect what we've all felt is that we're not perhaps doing the best things in the right way for the children we're trying to transport, and we haven't been perhaps as efficient as we could be. We did have a report done, an external report done on this last year, which I think you're aware of, an EDGE report, which came up with some ideas. And I have to say, brilliantly, we've set up a transport board with principally with the main players in that board are, of course, Phil Curd and John Perrott, who are behind us, where we put them through their paces about what they've been doing, what initiatives they've come up with, and so far it's been very positive. So I'm not going to steal their thunder. I'll let them tell you what they've come up with, but I'm really pleased to see it on the agenda, and I hope it's helpful.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Chair. I will take us through the slide deck and hand over to John at the appropriate points. So just to give you an overview of our statutory duty in relation to school transport. So we have a duty to provide transport or travel assistance to children who live beyond the statutory walking distance to their nearest suitable school, and that is for mainstream and specialist provision. The statutory walking distance is set at 2 miles for children aged under 7, 3 miles for children aged 8 and over. For children aged 11 or over from low-income families, there is some additional entitlement which would see us provide transport to one of the 3 nearest qualifying schools where the home address is more than 2 miles but no more than 6 miles from that school. And we also have exceptions for children with disabilities and medical conditions where they cannot reasonably walk to school even if they are suitably accompanied. Big challenge for us is demand, particularly around send transport. In terms of mainstream, that is tapering away, or it's plateauing and projected to taper. So on a typical school day, the council transports around 9,350 children and young people to various schools around the county. Of those, just over 8,000 go into mainstream schools at an average cost of £1,600 per child per year, and 1,250 are going into specialist settings at a significantly higher annual average cost of just over £10,000 per year. Whilst the number of children attending mainstream is set to plateau and then gently decline over the next 5 to 10 years, the number of children requiring specialist placements is projected to increase, and you'll see that on the graph on this slide. So since 2017, we've seen a significant rise in the number of children with education, health and care plans. It's a trend that has been mirrored across the country but amplified in Somerset as a result of our historic low statementing approach. But the graph there you see shows the kind of increased numbers of EHCP and the demand for specialist provision, where we know the individual average cost of school transport is much, much higher, currently at £10,000 child per year. In terms of cost, this is a big budget area. In 23-24, the cost of both home to school and school send transport
came in at £24.3 million. The cost of specialist transport has seen this most significant growth. So back at that cost us £4.6 million in 2018-19, 6.8 million in 2021-22, up to 8 million in 22-23, and then 11.9 million in 23-24. The budget for this year is in excess of 13 million and is currently set to be balanced. In parallel, the general cost of providing transport has increased significantly. So we've got some general inflation factors. We've had contractual increases of between 10 and 15%. And then we've also got staff costs specifically linked to Hinkley Point, which has its own park and ride system and is paying its drivers way above the market rate. So it's making it very difficult for our operators to retain their drivers. To offset those cost increases, we've already implemented a number of interventions, including the introduction of our big bus fleet, a dynamic purchasing system, the expansion of our personal travel payment scheme, and a robust statutory-only approach to policy. So this is from our the most recent nationally published Section 251 return. So this is 2023 data, and you will see that in terms of transport spend, Somerset is the fourth highest spending unitary authority, and you can see Somerset there as the teal column. Our comparator unitary authorities are marked in green. So we are the fourth highest spender in terms of home to school transport, and that is because we have a large rural county. But when we look at that spend as a per capita head rate, you can see that we are the best performing unitary authority of our type, in that all of our comparator authorities spend much more per capita head than we do. And typically those authorities below the dotted line, which is the average, are urban authorities which benefit from comprehensive public transport systems that we do not have the advantage of. So we are performing well in terms of spend per capita head. So the purpose of coming here today was kind of to close the loop essentially for a second time, to give this committee some oversight of the work that we have previously presented. So last time when we came, probably back in 22-23, we were presenting our cost management strategy, and that was launched, and we had an officer project group. We're exploring a range of cost reduction activities, which has largely fed into our performance in the 2023 251 return. So we were looking at our internal fleet, we were looking at additional budgets, looking at further cost avoidance and improved coordination between all of the services that have an input into school transport. So that work was presented at Scrutiny Committee, Children and Family, and the member supported task and finish group was proposed. That was then superseded to a degree. Whilst that work continued in the background, we had a transport review undertaken by Edge Public Solutions, and it published its report back in May 2023. So it highlighted many positive approaches to the work that we do in Somerset in terms of policy and assessment, but it did identify a number of supply side opportunities which could possibly result in some savings. The findings of that review in part have helped to inform our transport review project. That commenced in October 2023 and is overseen by a new transport board, which first met in October 2023 as well. So the areas of activity within that project include procurement, taxi licensing, market engagement, road dangers, personal budgets, travel training, and internal fleet efficiencies. And you will see, my eyesight doesn't let me down, that we were trying to save in terms of cost reduction and cost avoidance in the region of £2.5 million over a 3-year period. Whilst the budget sits within education, the project team consists of officers from a number of service areas, including finance, transport in Somerset, transport commissioning and children's commissioning. but a key part of the work has been support from other services within the council, including legal, procurement, HR, licensing, business intelligence, and colleagues in communications. We've also developed a data dashboard, which has been crucial to our decision making in helping us target where we can essentially get our biggest wins for the least amount of resource investment. So a key challenge when managing the budgets was the information that was available to us. And whilst we understood some of our headline data, we had no detail when unable to readily identify the key issues or areas of significant spend and how to address them. So the solution was a new purpose-built dashboard, and this allows us access to live information, which means we can monitor a key range of indicators and identify the opportunities to deliver savings and deliver our transport duty in a slightly different way. It's also allowed us to track the performance of the project and evidence the financial impact of our collective work. So you'll see there a couple of screenshots from our live data dashboard, and members of the Transport Board have access to an anonymised version of this, so they can see all of the data without seeing the individual information relating to children. And on any given day, we can open up the dashboard, we can see how many routes are running, how many children are being transported. We can look at individual routes, individual children, higher cost, lower cost, average costs. We can look at every single route and every stop on every single route. We can look at the numbers of PTPs, the numbers, we can see trend data, we can see average cost data, and we can extract all of the information, and that's allowed us to do some very significant work, including reviews of our most expensive per pupil routes. And of the first part of that work, where we undertook a review of our 20 most expensive per pupil routes, of that 20, only 3 remained untouched. The other 17 are either being retendered, being rerouted, or have been amalgamated and withdrawn. I'm going to hand over to John now, who's going to talk through a couple of our successes.
Good morning, councillors. My name is John Perrott. I'm the Service Manager for Transporting Somerset, and my team's responsibility is to deliver the council's passenger transport responsibilities across the county. So, as Phil has touched on earlier, I can give you a couple of examples of the work we've been doing and the successes we've had. In the licensing area, one of the issues we had from operators in particular, and this was taxi operators, was that the procedure for signing up to become a contractor for Somerset Council was onerous. And they were linking the process of taxi licensing to signing up onto our DPS, our tendering system, in order to win and tender for contracts. That process was quite onerous, but Unitary created opportunities for us and has led to closer working relationships between ourselves and the taxi licensing team. And we have ongoing dialogue now with taxi licensing officers about how we can improve the system further. We reviewed our processes, and taxi licensing team reviewed theirs. They've come from the 4 district councils, and they're still working on bringing that together and having similar rules. We've streamlined the checks to avoid duplication. So we're not asking, they were asking a series of questions when people wanted a taxi license, and then we were asking similar questions again. So we've streamlined all of that. So we now have transfer of data from taxi licensing, which means we don't go through that duplication. Taxi licensing have supported us by sending text messages and emails to new registered drivers and current operators, promoting the opportunity to register with Transporting Somerset so that they can then bid for the contracts available. And the result of that was a reduction in the sign-up process, which before was taking up to 3 months for operators, down to a minimum of around 2 weeks. We can now get operators on board. This is particularly useful for taxi operators who are owner drivers or very small operators, because they're often out on the road a lot and can't do a lot of the administration. And as a result of this work, since December 2023, we've signed up 32 new taxi operators have registered with us, bringing the total number of operators, which is big bus operators, minibus operators and taxis, to 164 now onto our DPS, and that's the highest number of registered operators we've ever had bidding on our contracts. Turning to some innovation around procurement. So as we touched on earlier, one of the teams we work closely with is the procurement team to try and look at how we could procure our contracts differently. The staffing situation at the end of the pandemic was particularly acute for operators. You may recall the government was encouraging people who had a HGV license to drive because there was a shortage of drivers, and a lot of, certainly in the big bus market, a lot of drivers were tempted by much higher wages and opportunities they had there. So our big bus operators suffered from driver shortages, and indeed so did minibus and taxi operators. I'm pleased to say that by and large the market, the situation has recovered. Our operators are pretty much saying that they're fully staffed now, so that has helped, and that's encouraging more competition. But we wanted to go a step further and trial a reverse auctioning process to see if we could encourage further competition amongst our bidding process. So working with procurement colleagues, we've added a reverse auctioning function to our tendering system, which introduces a second stage. So currently, or previously, you'd sign on to our system, a contract will come out for tender, an operator will bid a price, and the lowest price based on a 70% price, 30% quality would be awarded to the winning bidder. So essentially, it's a one opportunity to bid, and the lowest bidder, provided the quality was of a good standard, will win the contract. What we've now introduced is reverse auctioning, whereby operators make an initial bid for the contract, and then the operators that do bid go into a second round where they can effectively join a live auction, and then they can bid to see if they're willing or able to reduce their price further to see if they can win a particular contract. What we do have concerns, and we've had concerns about this, so we wanted to limit this to a trial. So we chose one area of the county, which is Mendip, and we chose one area of work, which is special educational needs transport, where we've seen the largest cost increases in recent years. And we were, at the time that this was written, we were planning to run between 20 and 30 live auctions. We've already run a number of those, and there's still live auctions going on currently. Trial commenced, and the first live auctions, as I say, have already taken place. We're now analysing the results carefully, and we need to look at this more over time, because one of our concerns is whether operators can sustain lower prices. If they decide to bid lower and they want to win a particular contract, is that going to adversely affect service quality? So are we going to find that operators cut corners? They try and link contracts together that don't fit. We get late running. And one of the important things on SEN contracts particularly is the continuity for drivers and passenger assistants on the vehicle. We ask for continuity as much as operators can deliver, and we're worried that people may swap staff around and cut other corners in order to deliver things at a lower price. But if the trial is successful, then obviously we will look to roll this out in other areas of the county going forward.
Thank you. Just to close, we spoke about our overall savings targets over a 3-year period. They're made up of cost reduction, so that's existing costs that we are actively reducing, and then cost avoidance, so costs that we would incur in the future but are in the process of reducing through our work. So that you will see that in total, we are looking at cost reduction target of just over 800,000, and to date we've achieved 266,000. But John just spoke about the procurement pilot and the savings that we know that we have secured through that pilot. We have not factored that into that slide. But the initial feedback from that exercise, following I think 20 live auctions, is that those 20 live auctions through the reverse auctioning process have achieved cost reductions of £249,000. So we need to monitor to see whether that level of cost is sustainable and whether quality is impacted upon. Once we are comfortable that the whole process is successful and it's not just cost reduction at the expense of other things, we can continue with the rollout of that process. So you'll see that we're doing well in terms of cost reduction. There's £250,000 savings that aren't on that slide. But in terms of cost avoidance, our target was 981,000. We've already achieved £1.4 million worth of cost reduction. So we've taken that future cost out of the system by being proactive now, and that is primarily through the use of personal travel payments, working with parents, giving them personal budgets that they can deploy to make their own arrangements and keep their children out of high-cost individual taxis. That's the end of the slides, Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Well, members start putting their hands up. Could you just jump back a few slides to Transport Review Project one, where you had the graph, the reddish beige, that one, the bit in the middle, the grid with the number. There's no titles there as to what they are. I'm sorry, I didn't quite understand.
Yeah, so the pink box, that there are cost avoidance and cost reduction savings, but they actually extend over. So you've got the if I jump forward, if I jump around the slides a little bit, what you have here are our savings targets up until the end of 25-26. If we go back to the pink box, they include targets for 26 and 27 as well. So that the savings target is higher because they include an additional year which we're not yet focused on. But yes, I think we're looking at £2.5 million of savings, cost reduction and cost avoidance there. But then if we roll forwards, we are looking at combined savings of somewhere in the region of 1.7, 1.8 million for 23, 24, 24, 25 and 25, 26.
Thank you for the clarity. I'll bring Evie in. Any other members?
Hi, thank you for this. My question is about the sufficiency of disabled access transport. The reason I've come into this one is because I had a question brought to me as a councillor from a member of my ward whose child is disabled and struggles to get taxis outside of the school. When I explored our online system to say how we're meeting our Equality Act under section 167, when you go onto the wheelchair accessible vehicles in South Somerset area and you click on that page, it then says, please note some businesses have opted out of having their details published on the register. Now, what I want just a little bit of comfort here is, can you assure me that we have suitable transport and that all of the needs of our children with any difficulties are being met, please?
Yeah, I can take that. Essentially, every operator who signs up to be a contractor has to meet certain criteria. So if we're looking at accessible vehicles, we expect them to be accessible. There are arrangements like that. That can be tail lifts, ramps. This transport is often delivered with minibuses. There is a lack generally of accessible taxis in the county, but our understanding is, unlike bus services, where there is a law which says all buses have to be accessible, that doesn't apply in the same way to taxis. So there is a shortage of accessible taxis, but if a child is in a wheelchair, they should be provided with an accessible vehicle. Obviously, we have care plans and EHCP plans, which we know the detail of. So every child should have the right type of transport for their needs to get from their home to school.
Thank you. Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, everyone's behind me. Just a question on the data, really helpful to have, and particularly to look at us in relation to how well we do from unitary authorities per cost per journey. I wonder if it would give us any more information. I would certainly feel more comforted. I mean, we know that the little unitaries are going to have small costs. I'm a bit amazed at how much BCP spends, what's it, Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole spends on transport for such a tiny area, but that's that's another one. Would it be helpful to be able to look at rural unitaries and upper tier authorities, so we could include Devon and other people like that who are more like us rather than the Elsa Silly or so on? That's one question, and maybe done that, it's just not been presented here, but would that give us anything more? That was one question. Another question was, I mean, it's really good to see all this work being done. It's particularly good to see the advantage being taken of the unitary status to sort out the taxi school transport stuff. It's lovely to see, because it hasn't all worked as seamlessly as that, and that one's good. One of the things about the reverse auction, we know we can't guarantee the same driver for a child with SEND all the time, but it can be really important for that child actually being in school to have some consistency. Is this, using the reverse auctions, is there any impact on how, or is it merely the initial procurement bit? Or are we likely to see this swapping more frequently for children with SEND, particularly those with emotional needs? So that's a question. I think I'm interested in, but I don't think it's really here, the impact on pay seats of the legislation around accessible vehicles and what that has done to children, particularly in the rural areas, or where they see a bus going to a school that they haven't got an entitlement to and may not be able to get on. So that's an area of interest. And the last one goes back to the children's services budget item, where it appears the grant that we have for the extended transport rights, which is essentially for the children living in deprivation, we appear to be using only a part of that. Are we disadvantaging children by not telling their families that this is here? Why is the government giving us money that we don't need? Are we using it in the way that we should, or are children missing out on it? Set of questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Francis. So I think there are 4 questions there. I will deal with 2 of them. So I'll take the first one, which is about comparative data. I will meet with colleagues from finance and business intelligence to see if we can pull comparative data for county council authorities. Because as a county council, we used to belong to a group, I think, of 11 comparator authorities. I used to be able to name them, but not anymore. So I can see whether we can pull that data to have and add that to our dashboard. And then I'll go on to the question 4, which is around the grant for extended entitlement. Essentially, if I go back to the slide, this one. So in the bottom paragraph, the second bottom paragraph, our extended entitlement grant helps us meet that duty. So for children aged 11 or over from low income families, that additional entitlement, that is the cost that the extended entitlement grant is due to pick up. And yes. So it's the grant that we receive is there to supplement our budget and help us meet the costs of meeting that additional duty for low income families. So the grant is being deployed for its purpose, and we are meeting that need for those children where they qualify.
We know people don't get transport unless they apply for it. How do we know that the right people are applying for it?
Okay, I'll make a note and we'll take that out of this meeting and we'll try and get your response. Because similarly, your point in relation to Devon, one of the issues with Devon is the fact that it's broken up into a number of unitaries as well. You have Torbay, Plymouth, so it isn't necessarily a apples and apples. There's a comparison, but I'll take that. So the question in relation to how comfortable are we that the children that could qualify are being given access, we'll take that out of the meeting and come back to you. Do you want to do the other 3 questions?
I can do the middle two. So the two questions, first, SEN contracts and continuity of staff. It is a condition of our contract that they do everything they can to maintain that continuity. It's term time delivery, so we kind of expect that operators, staff will take holidays and leave during school holidays, that kind of thing. Obviously, you know, people fall ill, people leave, and new staff start. So we cannot guarantee that. But what we do is try to make sure that you haven't got a different driver and PA every day and all that kind of stuff. So we monitor that. If we get complaints from parents, then we will follow that up with the operator to find out why crews are being chopped around. But one of our concerns of the reverse auctioning is that very thing. Are they going to find ways of allocating staff differently to reduce their costs, and we lose that continuity? And that's one of the things we'll be monitoring to see how that works with those 20 contracts that have gone out on that basis at the moment. And the second question on access pay seats. This is Public Service Vehicle Accessibility Regulations, PSVAR. This was introduced for local bus services many years ago. The interpretation that we and all other local authorities put on this originally was it only applied to local bus services, but the government decided that no, it also applied to school transport as well, and that anyone should be able to access any vehicle going to school. Obviously, for children who need wheelchair access and things like that, we provide specialist vehicles to do that. In a lot of our school transport is delivered by coaches. There are accessible coaches, they do exist, they're being produced, but they are extremely expensive to purchase. Operators don't have to operate those vehicles. And traditionally, school transport, let's be honest, is delivered by older vehicles in operators' fleets. When we go out to tender, we ask for accessible vehicles on all our contracts, and the responses we always get is that those vehicles are significantly more expensive than a standard coach. What we have done there, it's very complicated, but the government over the years have rowed back on delivery of this as a whole. So they've given exemptions to operators to continue to operate non-compliant vehicles on certain services, such as school transport, but only a percentage of their fleet. So I won't get into the complication of that. But what we have done is prioritise the routes that go into sixth form schools, because we sell pay seats to sixth form students. So what we did was, as we started to have to remove pay seats, we've done it on mainstream transport up to 16, and from 16 to 18, we're still offering pay seats on those routes and using the exemptions which are still available to us to deliver that. So that's the situation currently.
Thank you. Thank you for the responses. Okay, members, we have 4 members with questions and 25 minutes left on the clock. So I'll bring them in as I receive them. I'll take the in-room first and then the online. So Simon Carswell and then Marcus Cravis, and then we have John Hunt and Andy Hadley. So Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I quite like figures, so I just was quickly looking at the figures there. I assume the £193 per head takes into account the whole school roll and not those just to use the bus transport, or else I can't make that figure work. As to the £1,600 per pupil per year it costs for the not ordinary pupils, the pupils without extra needs, that equates to about £6 a day if we take into account holidays. Do we use existing bus routes where they work, or give vouchers to children to use those, especially secondary school age, rather than lay on the transport ourselves? Thank you.
The answer to that is yes, where we can. Most of our public transport network, particularly that we fund, is focused very much on getting students to the 5 FE colleges in Somerset. So a lot of our work in public transport for services that we fund, the timetable is built around making sure students can get to college in the morning and back in the evening. That does have, if you like, a slightly detrimental effect on schools because they have different times, particularly in the afternoons. But we do buy tickets, sorry, from operators where we can. So where a bus service serves a school reasonably close and runs at an acceptable time, then we do that. And we encourage operators, if they can, to try and meet those times. But obviously commercial services, it is for operators to determine the times that they run. But where we can, we do buy tickets on local bus services. Yeah.
Thank you. And I think as well, the success of the personal budgets as well has been quite influential over that. Marcus.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Phil and John, for possibly the most comprehensive answer to any question I've ever had. So it serves me right for not getting to the end of the agenda, I suppose. My question, I suppose, was because there's a lot of little questions, but they probably would all brought up in the task and finish group. But we touched about the distance to school travel and etc. Of course, in rural areas, then you have, is it safe? Because obviously where we live, we don't have any pavements, etc. And then before you know it, you've got a bus going down a country lane to pick up. I think I probably got the oldest average population of any parish. I think I heard on the news once, to pick up one child whose parents are more than adequately capable of taking them to the bus stop to get picked up elsewhere. But that's probably that's minutiae and detail for another time. My question, I suppose, was on that safe transport, etc. And we talk about active travel, we talk about active travel money, and we talk about improvements to cycle paths and making or improvements to pavements to make them cycle paths, etc., etc. Would there ever be a way of when people are deciding whether to make a pavement wider or make it safer, etc., if it exists or not? That actually there would be a knock-on effect of saving in school transport, so they could build that. Do they build that into their costings when they're looking at that? There's a very big nod there, so obviously people are ahead of me. But it was one of those where, I know, decisions have to be made on whether it's worth doing it and how that argument can be brought in.
Phil, I'll add on to that. Do you want to talk a little bit about centralised pickup as well with that one?
So on safe walking routes, our mapping system tells us exactly where all of our road dangers are. So essentially the unsafe routes, which mean children have to be picked up because they can't walk to their nearest suitable school, although they live within statutory walking distance. So we've, as part of our project, we've undertaken a review of all of those unsafe routes to see if there are corrections that we can make or pavements that we can put in that would physically take vehicles off of the road. And we're working with colleagues from highways to understand what those works would look like, what those works would cost, and put together a business case, which essentially means we could pay back the cost of the capital works through reduced revenue cost over a period of time. Our first one is across frustratingly, the cycle path that links North Peverton and Bridgewater was assessed as inappropriate by an independent appeal panel, despite the guidance that came from our road safety auditor. So we're now working with highways to put a formal crossing in across the road that leads to the Wilstock development. And that will take 3 coaches off of the road each morning, which is a very significant cost. So we're just working up the cost of that crossing and paying back that capital using the revenue savings that we'll achieve. But also we work with our planning colleagues to make sure that where we have new housing developments, those new housing developments provide safe walking routes to education infrastructure. So new housing developments don't result in additional school transport journeys. And that's something that we are discussing time and time again. The ROSPA guidance, incidentally, doesn't require pavements. It looks at road speed, as long as there is sufficient step off, and you look at traffic flow, you look at road speed, you look at undulation, you look at twists and turns. If all of those are within a given threshold, then a route can be safe without a pavement. And street lighting isn't considered either as part of that guidance. Second question, centralised pickup points. So one of the things that we are exploring more frequently now is the use of centralised pickup points, typically around children that are travelling into specialist provision. So historically, mainstream children congregate at bus stops and they get onto their vehicles in large groups and they go to their mainstream school. For children going to specialist provision, the trend was to collect those children from their home address. Now, that meant lots of individual pickups. It meant longer journey distances, longer journey times, and for children with special educational needs and disabilities, longer journey times can be really problematic. So what we started maybe 2 or 3 years ago is the introduction of centralised pickup points. So where you have a sufficient amount of scale, so for example, in a market town, let's say in the town of Chard, you've got a group of maybe 8 or 9 children that all go to the same special school in Yeovil. We introduced a central pickup point in Chard and we asked parents to bring their children to the vehicle and we collect them in one place and we have a shorter journey time and distance. That achieves savings, but it also kind of makes that journey more manageable for those young people. Now, over time, we've increased the number of centralised pickup points, but this year we have been very overt in our strategy to introduce more and more of those where it is appropriate for those children. So we will have centralised pickup points at risk assessed locations, but we'll also work with our special schools. So if they tell us, for example, that there are a cohort of children within their provision for whom a centralised pickup point would not be appropriate, then we will continue to collect that child from their home address and have a much more bespoke arrangement for them. It has generated lots of communication from parents, which is absolutely fine, and we're responding to those as and when they come in.
Thank you. That was why I wanted to add it on, because it's a bit of a push this year. It's having a little bit of impact. I've had a number of communications. Thank you. Okay, we'll go online. John Hunt, Councillor Hunt, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. A question about the reverse auction. A thought is, having been, I'm sure you all have too, but I've been to a lot of auctions and seen many people knee-jerk bidding, i.e. they're paying too much, or in this case, bidding too little to actually gain the product they're looking for. I'm assuming that we have amongst our team or somebody there who can actually assess what we consider to be a paying fare, as in my concern is the taxi themselves bid too low, can't afford to actually run the service once they get it, and we end up 3 months down the road having to find somebody else. Do we have within our team somebody who's able to sit there and say, okay, to get from Yeovil to Chard, you gave the example just now, to go from Yeovil to Chard, a taxi would cost this much, and because it's special provision, then it should be this much. So we have a sort of a ballpark figure in our mind, which is a minimum, really, that taxi companies should be paying. Thank you, Chair.
So that, yeah, I think the answer to that is yes, we do. I mean, obviously, the way we divide the county up is very much on the old district lines to a certain extent in terms of schools. So we have a transport officer who looks after an area. All our transport officers know what, if you like, a reasonable price for a contract is, because they see that all the time. And obviously the reverse auctioning, what we did to a certain extent with the pilot was we picked what we felt where we gave notice on some contracts, we picked those contracts that we felt were a little high in their cost. And that's one of the reasons we've achieved some of those savings, is that those costs have come down. But if we saw something that we felt was abnormally low, then we would question that. And indeed, in our normal procurement process, we will flag to procurement officers if we felt that someone was bidding exceptionally low for a contract. As you know, we run our own fleet of vehicles. We run 100 minibuses and 5 coaches. We know what it costs to run those vehicles. If we saw something that was very unusual, then we would obviously take a closer look at that. All I can say is that for what we've seen so far from the reverse auctioning, there's nothing abnormally low. What we don't know, of course, is individual operators' own costs. So it may be low for them and they may not be able to sustain it. But looking at what we've seen so far, we don't think there's any figures in there which seem unrealistic in the market, if you see what I mean.
If I may, Chair?
Yes, John.
Yeah, thank you for that great answer. And I would like to say, I think this is a terrific idea. And actually, clearly saving, I think it was over £200,000, you said, obviously works very well indeed. So well done and congratulations on that.
Thank you. Councillor Hadley, Andy.
Thank you, Chair. My question or my comments are along the same sort of lines with the reverse auction. I mean, there are obviously some concerns regarding quality with the reverse auctions. That's why there's been a review. And with the review, I think some of the costs may rise again. And I'm a little concerned that we might shoot ourselves in the foot when it comes to the budget process by forwarding savings that we can achieve that in the end we're not going to be able to. So our budget predictions go up, or in the worst possible context that we continue with the budget savings, even though that we know the quality is down, just so that we can make budget savings. I'd like some sort of confidence that if the quality drops, they will stop that and they will go back and demand a higher quality, even if that means the price goes up.
Yeah, so we share those concerns. To give you a bit more of an insight, what we've seen in Mendip, and we've seen this happen before, one particular operator has retained the contracts of theirs that were up for retender and then won a few more. So what they're doing is obviously increasing their market share and then trying to charging lower prices, but spreading that over to get an average, if you like, across all the contracts. So we are conscious that in this case, an operator has decided to engage enthusiastically, shall we say, in the process. And that's why we really want to take time to see what happens going forward. So our view is that we need to analyse this over at least a 6-month period to see how those contracts perform and can this be sustained and what is the quality. That operator has been a contractor for us for a while, and we've got no significant concerns with them, but obviously we want to see what the impact of that is before we roll it on. But of course, I just want to make the point that in this case, where the operator has taken that approach, not all operators will do that. So, you know, results are going to vary from area to area and contract to contract, and we may see less of a saving in some areas when we roll it out further. But our big concern is very much that what impact does this have on the market, and what impact does it have on the quality, and that's what we need to assess over a period of time.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. So just a summary then. So the members have already made mention of a congratulations or a thank you and a well done. I think that the journey that this has gone on over the last couple of years has been phenomenal, and the point we've reached is brilliant. On from that, what I will say is, are we making notes for best practice? Are we advertising the fact that we're doing some good work? And if not, let's make sure we do that. Phil?
Thank you, Lee. Yes, we've presented our findings to a couple of national forums, and we're now getting lots of local authorities approach us to meet with us to talk through the work that we're doing, specifically around our data dashboard, because that alone has had a huge impact on our ability to target our work. So Oxfordshire were in contact last week. Another council were in contact on Monday. So yeah, we've presented this nationally, and lots of people are now coming to us because, you know, we are doing this well.
So can we have a conversation outside of the meeting to see if I can help in that way? I managed to retain my place on the Children and Young People's Board at the LGA, and I'd like to try and feed that into that if I can, because it's just, we should be making the best opportunity of celebrating our successes rather than having people pointing at us and criticising it. I think we don't do enough of the what we do well stuff. Thank you, and yeah, so we'll. Thank you for closing the loop. Thank you for bringing this report. It's a positive report, and I think there's some amazing opportunities that have come out of it. And let's sing our praises for as much as we can. Phil, John, thank you very much, members. Okay, homeward stretch, members. Item 10 of our agenda, items for information. Francis made reference to one of them that was circulated between the meetings. I'd like to remind you all that we do that and ask that you can have a look at it. One of the ones that I think is that was included in that was the briefing note in relation to academisation and the decision-making process around that. Very often, as members, we're asked questions and we don't always have the answers that are ready there. So yeah, so I would signpost you to that. But are there any other points or questions in relation to the documents circulated? No. Okay, moving on then. So thank you very much for your time. I now declare the meeting closed and see you in September. Thank you.